Hi, everybody. I'm PJ Kwong for SGS Live. And in today's session, we're going to be focusing on a couple of topics that are top of everybody's mind, and they are sustainability and performance. The twist is rather that we are looking at ESG and how those two aspects figure into this. So, how is this important for your company or your business? And what can you do to amplify your efforts that will yield results? There's a lot to uncover here, and we're calling this session From Clutter to Clarity or Clarity to Clutter. Either way, whatever you want to say. And for this conversation, I am joined by Adam Hammes, who is the ESG Director for SGS North America. Welcome, Adam.
Thanks for having me, PJ.
So good to have you here. And we're going to get right started right away. First thing I want to know is, can you tell me a little bit more about your role at SGS?
Absolutely. So I'm responsible for the delivery of all of our ESG and sustainability solutions across US and Canada. My role sits in the knowledge division. That means we have a big focus on things like verification and assurance. But with our technical expertise, we offer training, advisory services, assessments, as well. Speaking of training, I want to mention we're offering a 20% discount for all of our training through the end of December.
So what people need to do is to scan that code and it takes them to a page that gives them more information. 20% off. That's great. And you know what? Based on your introduction of what it is you do, you don't seem like you're busy at all. So I guess what I want to know is, it seems like improving ESG sustainability performance is a topic that is on everybody's mind for their business. What are ESG and sustainability? And really, are they the same thing?
Great question. I'll try to be brief. So ESG, it's an acronym, so it's helpful. It's E, S, and G: environmental, social, and governance. It's a more useful way of talking about something called non-financial reporting, which is boring to talk about, but we know, what does that mean? Non-financial reporting is anything relevant to a business and our clients that investors want to know, especially that are not measured in dollar signs. So it's pretty self-explanatory in the name. So investors want non-financial data. They always have, for the most part. There's three main buckets over time that have emerged, and that kind of data is E, environmental data; S, social data; or G, governance information. So besides financials, that's what investors ask for. So that's the E, S, and G. So for example, to make it real, an industrial manufacturer, they have expensive electricity use. They're asked to report that. Electricity is not measured in dollars as much as it is kilowatt hours. And so that's an environmental metric. Employee turnover is very expensive, especially for high skilled positions. That's measured as a percentage, usually as a ratio. That's a social metric. And managing risk, investors want to know the senior leadership structure, especially that is in place to track these environmental and social metrics. And that's a governance disclosure, less of a metric. And so that's the ESG part.
So now that you have clearly defined ESG for us, can you do the same thing for sustainability? I mean, do they differ?
Yes, ESG is specifically non-financial data. That's why the three-letter acronym exists. And that's what they're looking for from an investor standpoint. But they review that alongside the financial data to get the full picture of the risks and opportunities of the business. And that full picture ESG data plus financial data is what we mean by sustainability for the business. It's the total of all the relevant data, financial and non-financial for a company. And that's from a company's point of view. There are other definitions, but we're really talking about corporate. So at SGS, we tend to use ESG and sustainability not interchangeably, but together, ESG and sustainability, ESG and sustainability. We know that ESG by itself is usually very specific to those non-financial numbers or metrics, and it's usually coming from the public sphere. That's where it originated. But even private companies and clients look at environmental, social, and governance data, not just their financials. You're never looking at this stuff in a vacuum. It's just good business. And so, like I said, we tend to use them together, ESG and sustainability. We use a lot of the same tools, a lot of the same processes to make sure that we're serving our clients appropriately.
So I guess none of this seems really all that new. I mean, companies have been reporting on things like leadership and turnover for quite a while, maybe not energy. So what's changed?
Well, so you're right. Investors have, they've always wanted this kind of information. They've increasingly asked for non-financial data, and that really a long time ago, since the 1920s, the Great Recession, or the Great Depression, I'm sorry, of the 1920s. And there were financial reforms to stop that from happening again. It was a global event, hurt a lot of people. And so some things like the management discussion and analysis sections of financial reports, MD&A, that is a result of investors wanting context, not just historical accurate data. They want insights into past performance, but also future performance. And that non-financial data, that context, has tended to fall into these three buckets: environmental, social, and governance. So what's changed? That whole process, it took decades. Just because the financial sector wanted more responsibility, they had to eventually partner with the environmental movement, the social responsibility movement. And they were developing, for decades, we've been developing frameworks and standards of how do businesses report. What do they report, and how do they report it consistently? Because that's what investors want to see, because they want to use it for comparison. So it's taken that much time. Only now have we really reached a tipping point where industries have tested and updated most of these tools. They're widely adopted around the world. With climate change now at the forefront of economic issues, energy prices are rising. Energy and climate have really, basically now made the list of relevant business concerns. But those things are not new. They're just now hitting businesses, and it's very measurable. And we have tools that we know how to use.
You know what else has made the list? Our trivia question, which is what we're going to move to right now. We always have the chance to check in with our audience, and you get to play along with us with this multiple choice question. Adam, you don't get to play because you already know the answer. So from the following responses, which is not common among ESG metrics? Number one, payroll. Number two, greenhouse gas emissions. Number three, percentage of women in leadership. Or number four, anti-bribery policies. We're looking for what you think is not common among ESG metrics. Okay, Adam, you know what? People may not know this, but there is a whole team behind us that helps us put on these SGS Lives. And among them, we have Fulvio, our backstage producer. We have Elsa. We have Anne. We have Summer. And Fulvio, there you are, because I know you've been dying to ask a question.
How you doing, PJ? It feels weird to be on this side of the stage, right? But I'm happy to join you guys, and I do have a question. I think this is such a great topic. I don't know a lot about it, that we thought, hey, let me ask the question personally, right, rather than put it in the comment section. So, Adam, my colleague, who's an expert in ESG, here's my question. We did not have ESG, or we did not have at least this focus on ESG for a very long time. But lately, it just seems to be everywhere. Why is that the case? Why is the ESG right now like the hot topic? Before you answer that question, I do want to say and repeat what PJ said. There is a team behind this. I want to say thank you to all of them. Elsa in France and in Virginia, PJ's in Canada. Our speaker today, Adam, is in Iowa. We're all over the place, and the team comes together to put these things to produce these SGS Lives for you. If you have a topic you want us to address in a future SGS Live, put it in the comment section too. Our friend Summer from our digital team is watching the comment section. She'll take your suggestions, and we'll have a future SGS Live perhaps from one of your suggestions. Thanks, guys. Thanks for the opportunity to ask the question.
Bye, Fulvio. Back
it's
to work.
Great to see your face, Fulvio. Thank you.
Exactly.
And to the whole team, I echo that. Thanks for all the hard work being done behind the scenes. So, Fulvio, why now? Why is ESG kind of blowing up and on everybody's mind? I would say kind of a little bit going off of what I just said, the tipping point. Don't think that these things are new. It's more of the culmination of a lot of different things, and now they're coming together worldwide. Institutional investors definitely are like high adoption. That's cascading down from the bigger companies into their supply chains. Regulations are now starting to, once there are good standards and frameworks, regulation can then be made, good regulation that will last. So all of it has really just in the last few years hit this culmination of all the work being done, like I said, probably for 20 years easily. And now we have real tools for the business community that have been tested. And so ESG, honestly, it's kind of been thrust out of the publicly traded sphere, the larger publicly traded companies, because it's so helpful. It's those E, S, and G categories, whereas sustainability was often used, but sustainability in any context can mean a million different things. And so really ESG is now front and center because, the investor community, the financial community, they're looking for practical tools that are helpful, that don't cause confusion. So that's why ESG is at the forefront, but it's a culmination of everything that's happened for the last 20 years.
So guess what, everybody? Stay tuned because there's going to be more clarity from Clutter coming up. But in the meantime, I'm interested to see some of the comments and answers to our questions about what are not common metrics for ESG. The answers were number 1, payroll, number 2, greenhouse gas emissions, number 3, % of women in leadership, and number 4, anti-bribery policies. The answer is number 1, everybody, payroll. So it's not anti-bribery policies, although that's a good guess. The answer is number 1. Payroll is not a common ESG metric, but percent of employees paid in a living wage is. So thank you very much to everybody for playing along. All right, let's get back to our conversation, Adam. In listening to discussions and debates, it seems like we're not always speaking the same language. So where is the breakdown in communication?
You point to a very good and very real phenomenon. Usually, in my opinion, it comes down to perspective or scale or both. I like sailing metaphors. So some people are talking about the whole ocean while they're standing on shore, preparing to head out to sea. They're making plans. Some people have been sailing for a while. They're on the water and they're riding a big wave and they're currently dealing with that. And so there's everything in between. There's very specific in the weeds and there's big picture planning. And like we just said, ESG and sustainability is the broad encompassing lens to look at through an organization for environmental, social, and governance. And we talk about that. We're discussing high-level strategies for specific industries and companies. So that's where I think the breakdown in communication is.
Okay, fair enough. But maybe you can share some idea about the kinds of questions you get.
Absolutely. So the questions for ESG, when we're trying to find out what conversation are we having, like with a client, the questions are big picture and strategic. If it's ESG, what are our most material ESG topics and why? Or they might say, what are our most important or most relevant? What are our priorities and why? And that's a big picture question. How do we improve our overall ESG and sustainability performance? Very broad questions. And those are services we do offer at SGS. We have stakeholder engagement, peer benchmarking, materiality assessments. We help identify with our clients ESG and sustainability priorities so you can focus on the right things.
All of this is very, very interesting to me, but I'd like to talk for a moment about some specific examples, if you can offer any.
Yeah, I mean, especially when you get down in the weeds, it gets way more specific. I've worked with convenience stores, I'll go through my list, some media conglomerates, some hotels, real estate firms, soccer clubs, wineries, farms, financial firms, you name it. We serve manufacturing, food, medical, personal care. None of them have the same ESG and sustainability priorities. They might be some overlap, but these are different industries, different business models. And so when you get into the very specifics where the rubber meets the road, a client will say, we already know energy performance is a material topic for us. How do we assess that? And how do we set targets for the future and make improvements? So suddenly you've gone from this big ESG lens to really specific, and how do we make change and positive change in energy? And there's thousands of other topics you could be talking about. And just like sailing, you go from prepping the boat on the shore to riding that wave with your crew. And, we do both for our clients.
You know what? We are also riding a wave, and that's the audience wave. Here on these SGS Lives, we have a global audience, people from everywhere. And if we take a look at our comments, we can see that that is, in fact, the truth. What I'd like to do is to welcome one and all to this SGS Live. And if you're just joining us, I am speaking with my SGS expert, Adam Hammes, who is the ESG Director for North America. And we are talking about achieving clarity from clutter. ESG, sustainability, and performance for your business. We're going to have a Q&A at the end of this interview segment. Feel free to leave your questions and comments in the chat window below. And once again, welcome to one and all. All right, Adam, you are really breaking this all down for us, but I hear a lot of talk about the confusing alphabet soup of ESG, and there being too many acronyms to keep track of. What is this all about?
Yes. Another very real phenomenon. I hope my earlier ESG explanation was helpful, just the definition, because as a concept, I think we can agree that ES and G as an acronym isn't that confusing, but that's not the alphabet soup. The complaint usually, in my experience, is referring to, they're referencing the many reporting frameworks and standards and also ESG rating agencies that exist in the marketplace today. And that specifically, that can be very frustrating, especially to anyone trying to become familiar with them all, or more importantly, try to sift through them and see which ones are relevant for my organization. It can often feel like you have to make countless people happy. It's a no-win situation. That's not really true, but the experience is very real.
So I guess what I'm looking for, if you can, is a quick breakdown of frameworks, standards, and rating agencies that makes it easier for us to understand. I mean, how do companies identify which ones are relevant to them so they can avoid trying to please everyone?
Yes, absolutely. I'll gladly summarize those, and Fulvio, I think, is going to pull up some graphics. And I'll start out by saying, before we go into this, it's going to be brief because we're on an interview live, but there's a lot more detail we go into in our ESG training modules. So if you look at our website, SGS Academy, I just can't say enough about the 20% discount and how valuable our training is to our clients. But here's the brief summary of the visual. So you've got very high level, like I said, there's ESG frameworks and standards. Frameworks are what to report, frameworks are how to report the context, and standards are what to report, specific KPIs. So if I go across the top, GRI is a framework and a standard. It's the oldest one. The UN SDGs are very government, municipality kind of focused, but they've been around for a long time, since 2000. GRI was back in 1997. But SASB is new. It came on the market in 2011, but they've kind of skipped it. It's a done for you industry specific standard. They did 77 different industries, and they averaged 5 topics, only 13 metrics on average per industry to kind of speed the process of adoption. And then integrated reporting is a framework, if you hear about IR, where it's really about embedding and integrating your sustainability and your ESG reporting into your annual filings for public companies. So those are very high level. I showed everything across the bottom because you will probably also be familiar with TCFD, ISO 14064, GHG protocol, SBTI, CDP is not circled here, but it's on the bottom. Everything is climate related because climate is so popular, but it is not an ESG framework and standard. It's so specific. It's not even environmental. It's climate. It's one issue. But I put them up there so you can see that those are 4 standards. They're just not elevated to the high strategy level of an ESG framework and standard. So if we go to the second graphic on the rating agencies, they're the middle ground. Something I didn't mention on the top, they're very neutral. Those frameworks and standards tell you what to do and how to report, but they don't judge you in any way. They just say, here it is, do this. And then we let other people judge you. Those other people are these ESG rating agencies, MSCI, ISS, Sustainalytics, EcoVadis. They exist to judge you. They're not neutral. They score performance based on different weightings and algorithms, and they compare you against your peers. So for better or worse, that's what they are. And CDP, which is circled, is a rating agency, but they are a climate rating agency. Technically, they have a water and a forestry questionnaire as well, but by far, they've always been and have the most participation and adoption from their carbon disclosure project days. So that's how they're different. And hopefully that can at least put things in categories for you, so you know what kind of conversation you're having when people throw out these acronyms.
I have a question from our audience from Siva Kumar Kotapalli. Risk rating versus impact rating. Which one is important?
Well, language is everything. So it's really hard for me to even know, because some of those ratings, most of them are looking at risk, to be honest. Impact ratings typically come in a portfolio where you're trying to get a positive sense of the different things, but that can be very customized. Those impact ratings, it really depends on what you're talking about. Most of these that I showed are considered a risk rating, but we'll talk about them in detail later. So it depends on who's asking, because it's a subjective opinion, and it depends on the company. So it's good to know the difference. A risk rating is usually specifically for investors who are trying to minimize risk, and an impact rating is sometimes, it comes out of the impact investing community that they're not necessarily demanding a return on investment. Impact is actually sometimes defined as not needing a return on investment. There's social responsible investing that's trying to do other things, but there's a lot of things to tease apart there. We don't have time today. We do go into it in the training, but just know that there is a difference. One is trying to focus on the positive outcomes, and one is trying to minimize negative risks.
You know what? That is a great explanation, just like your explanation for the acronyms, because now when I hear one, at least I will know what topic we're discussing. So I want to come back to my earlier question, though. You said that businesses don't need to make everyone happy, but how do they know who they need to make happy, and what do they need to focus on in those areas that really matter?
Great. It's the perfect question. I think that every business, to be responsible, needs to ask. What I would say, the short answer is it's a well-known process from the financial sector, and it's called materiality assessment. That sounds, again, maybe boring or confusing, but it's really a historical term. It only referred to financial data. It means relevance or priorities. Material means it can impact the business. But with rising shareholder demand for non-financial ESG reporting, we're now kind of subsuming those three categories, E, S, and G, into materiality assessment. So briefly, you talk to key stakeholders, not just your shareholders, anyone who can influence the business or groups that are impacted by the business, and you engage with them for their feedback. Employees, customers, regulators, suppliers, communities, these are the most common, and it gives you the most comprehensive look for both positive and negative impacts. And then those are your top choices for topics. They tell you specifically what they think you should measure, manage, and report on. So you don't need to guess. You have groups for very specific examples, you have existing investors, or you don't, but a lot of companies do. And you know usually what your potential investor pool is. They will share with you exactly which ESG rating agency they think is the most critical and the most trusted, or the one they're using for decision making. Whereas employees, customers, and maybe business partners, they share more their expectations on the topics they want you to deal with, or the KPIs, or even sometimes even the ESG reporting frameworks and standards they expect you to use. You just have to ask, and that's how you narrow that field down and only look at the things that are most relevant to you.
So, Adam, let's bring it back around to sort of SGS services, and maybe you can give me a couple of examples of what this kind of work looks like for a customer.
Always happy to talk about clients. So materiality assessment is the key. I can't say it enough. We help businesses identify their most critical issues and why. And that why is important. It's so valuable, whether you're starting from scratch or you're fine-tuning an existing strategy. You've got to focus on the most important things. Otherwise, you can't do them really well. senior leaders, they need confidence and they want confidence in their decision to focus on those topics, not only which ones are included, but excluded, because we're in a very skeptical market right now, a lot of criticism. So you got to be able to also respond to questions and criticisms and do it in a straightforward manner. You got to reference, hey, we know because of this. This is the process we went through. These are the standards we follow. These are the ones we don't follow and why. And that's what materiality assessment gives you. And it ultimately gets to how you're performing in the most important areas. It's a very strong position to come from. And those stakeholders, not just investors, all stakeholders, they want detailed responses. We're a much more educated public and a much more educated marketplace than we ever were. And if you can't answer those questions, people sometimes just assume and jump to the worst conclusion. So at SGS, we size our services appropriately. You've got very in-depth stakeholder engagement. We have a condensed ESG health check. We've got stuff in the middle, and we've got a fully compliant AA1000 GRI double materiality assessment. And there's room to change in between, and you can grow and start with a health check and go from there. But that's what we do and how we help clients.
All right. If you are just joining us, you are in the middle of a fascinating conversation that I am having with my SGS expert, ESG Director for North America, Adam Hammes. And we're talking about improving sustainability and performance and ESG. Don't forget, we are having a Q&A at the end of this interview segment. We would love to see your comments and questions in the chat window below. But for right now, it's back to our conversation. So Adam, what you've said throughout this conversation makes total sense to me. But it sounds like it might be a lot of work, or is it? Or is stakeholder engagement pretty simple and easy? Do you have any examples of what you're talking about?
Well, simple does not always mean easy, but everything takes works. But SGS can make it easier, and the benefits are definitely worth it. Now, stakeholder engagement provides the most benefits on what you're going to do and why, but it takes the longest. It can be done very efficiently. Like I said, we scale it to the company. We always recommend using a partner who's trained in AA1000, SES, the 2018 standard. That's the gold standard for stakeholder engagement. It just helps you make sure you include and exclude the right stakeholders for the right reasons to capture the maximum benefits. You have to manage and minimize those risks, because anytime you go outside the company, there's risks involved as well. So we don't want to create a false expectation with people that we're engaging with. We also don't want to engage a stakeholder that lacks credibility or won't abide by confidentiality agreements, etc. So depending on how many stakeholders you prioritize, I've seen it take 3 months. And a lot of that is just planning time, scheduling. It's not 3 months of straight work, but I've also seen it take over 6 months. And it depends on how robust you want it to be. That's why we typically recommend you stagger your engagement, do some high tier, you score your stakeholders and you rank them based on several categories, but you take your highest tier group first, the highest risk. You don't want to have any blind spots, but then the next year you can follow up with a different set of second tier stakeholders, and you can bite off what you can chew that year. So it's definitely manageable.
I guess I want to move to the stakeholders for just a minute. I want to find out how you sort of assess what you're doing in each of your various areas and how they can trust your numbers.
Well, trusting our numbers is it's really about who you're asking, because if you're looking for trust, transparency is the first thing. You've got to have reporting, and that alone alleviates a lot of risks and helps relieve investors and shareholders and stakeholders. The ultimate desire is to see improved performance. So they want to trust that not only you showed them what you're doing, but you're getting better or you're maintaining an appropriate level of performance ongoing. And so that's it. You really want to measure these things, and you have to report. So that's where the ESG rating agencies and their scores do serve a strong purpose. Although imperfect, and there's plenty of criticisms both ways, they sometimes get criticized for catering to a specific group of investors or weighting their scoring algorithms differently or changing them. But they do measure and score transparency, performance, and third-party assurance, which we really value because we do that. And so it's looking broadly across multiple categories, and it's stacking you up against your peers. So that's really the only way to be competitive and to know if you're doing well or not doing so well.
Adam, we're going to go to our Q&A, and we're going to be talking about our climate action in question 2. But for the moment, what I want to hear about is about a couple of those pesky acronyms to which we alluded, namely TCFD, CDP, and SBTs. I had to look down to make sure I had all those letters right. Can you comment about those?
Yeah, and Fulvio might have the old graphic that we could pull back up. Yeah, so across the bottom, I said there's the climate, the specific issue. Those are very popular standards right now. So if I go across, these are the standards. I'll skip CP first. TCFD is a risk framework for reporting on 4 categories. It's a framework, not a standard. Doesn't tell you what to report, but how. Science-based standards is specifically about aligning your goals that you set for the Paris Treaty level of reduction. So 50% reduction by 2030, climate neutral net zero by 2050, and it's just for goal setting. Greenhouse gas protocol was the kind of de facto for a long time carbon accounting, how to measure your carbon footprint or your GHG inventory. And now ISO came online and is in its second version, 2018, and it's becoming more of the industry standard, but it's based heavily off of greenhouse gas protocol. And then CDP last is a rating agency. They're based off all the other standards, but they actually give you points for disclosure, transparency, actual performance, and if you have third-party verification of your data.
I told you we were going to get back to climate change, and here we are. I know you are keeping your eye on the COP conference on climate change that is taking place right now in Egypt. How would you describe where we are at in North America versus how the EU is managing sustainability? And is there reason for optimism?
Well, I hope there's always reason for optimism. Otherwise, what are we doing? But from a regulatory perspective, just some context before we jump into COP, North America is typically 5-ish years behind Europe, Eastern Asia, South America. They're more progressive on the regulatory front. Doesn't mean we're not doing the work, but the regulatory isn't at the same level. Climate's no different. The US EPA proposed rules for climate disclosure specifically, not performance. It was delayed legally, which we expected, but probably in the next year it's going to become approved. Also, if you're looking at COP, the White House just during COP27 in Egypt recently released a new rule for suppliers. So any government contractors for the US government are going to have to do different levels of disclosure through CDP. That's probably only going to take through January to get approved. And so things keep moving forward. Like I said, there's a tipping point worldwide. So even if we're not at the exact same pace as Europe, which no one expects us to be typically, everything's still moving in that direction. All institutional investors are moving in that direction. It's not about whether we're going to do it, it's how we're going to do it. How do we align these frameworks? How do we speed adoption and make it easier for companies? And ultimately, that's what investors are asking for. So it's going to happen. And COP27, the big sticking point right now is more of the financing. You see a lot of companies smaller countries, asking when are these bigger countries who are doing the most emitting of greenhouse gases going to finance the projects to save these smaller countries, especially the ones that are in low-lying island countries. They're actually risking their population having to integrate to the mainland.
This is our final question in what has been the fastest half hour in I don't know how long. Adam, let's talk about SGS services in a more broad way. What are the next steps for a client or a customer who is looking to engage with you or to get your help?
I would say just use the information on the screen. Fulvio's going to put it out there, and you can reach out to me directly and we can have a conversation. I can certainly send you a brochure of our services. And a conversation is the best way to get your specific needs of your business understood, and we can share exactly how we can help.
So there's that QR code. If you want to be in touch with Adam or anybody else from the team, scan the QR code and it will take you to a page that can do that. I want to thank my guest, Adam Hammes, for this fascinating half hour talking about ESG and sustainability and improving your business's performance. Adam, thank you so much.
Thanks for having me, PJ, and thanks to the whole team. Thanks to everyone watching. We really appreciate you joining us.
And to our audience, we are so glad that you were able to join us today for this interesting and informative session. Don't forget that if you wish to learn more, just go to that QR code on the screen, scan it, and you'll be taken to a page where you can get more information. I also want to remind you about that 20% discount for training services that goes through to the end of December. Again, scan the QR code and it will take you to where you need to go. I want to thank you once again for joining us. I'm PJ Kwong for SGS Live, and bye for now.